Some people say family is the one thing that can't break you because it's the one thing that's supposed to hold. But I've buried enough people up on this mountain to know the truth. Family isn't the thing that holds you. Family is the thing that decides whether to hold you. Her name was Della Whitmore, and she came up my road on a January night with frostbite starting in 2 fingers and nothing in her arms but a child that wasn't breathing right. She had 3 brothers down in the valley, grown men. Land, cattle, warm stoves, full pantries. Every one of them had shut a door in her face that same week. And here's the part I still can't make peace with, even now, with my own hands going stiff in the cold as I write it down. The men who owed her everything gave her nothing. And a stranger who owed her nothing, an old fool with a bad hip and a mountain that barely fed one, gave her the only thing he had left. If you've ever been turned away by the people who were supposed to catch you, stay with me. Because this story isn't about how cruel her brothers were. It's about what a person becomes when she finally stops waiting for the door to open and starts building her own. Stay till the end. There's a moment near the finish I've never told a living soul. Been keeping it 41 years now, since the winter my wife Marta died and I needed something to do with my hands that wasn't grief. Every morning I write down the date, the temperature, whether the aspens have dropped, when the first ice skins the trough, when the last snow melts off the north face of Bald Knob. Folks in the valley think it's a foolish habit for a grown man. Maybe it is. But a mountain will kill you if you don't pay attention to it, and paying attention is the only kind of prayer I've got left. The night Della Whitmore came, my book already said the thing I most feared. January 9th, 22 below by dark, wind off the pass, no mercy in it. I'd banked the fire and I was half into sleep in my chair when the dog started up. Not his warning bark, the low one, the one that means something's wrong and it's coming closer. I'm an old man. I don't move fast. By the time I got the door cracked, she was already at the bottom of my steps, and she wasn't walking so much as falling forward and catching herself, over and over. The way a person walks when walking is the only thing standing between them and lying down for good. She had a bundle held so tight against her chest that at first I thought it was firewood. Then the bundle made a sound, a thin, wet, terrible little sound, and I knew. "Please," she said. That was all. Her lips were so cold the word came out cracked in half. I don't remember deciding to help her. There's no decision in it, not really. You either are the kind of man who opens the door or you're the kind who doesn't, and you find out which one on nights like that. I got her inside. I got the child out of her arms, and Lord, that boy was blue at the mouth and his little chest was working too hard for how little air it was moving. Croup, or worse. The kind of sick where the night decides for you. I've raised cattle through blizzards. I've pulled calves in the dark with the cow screaming and my arms in past the elbow. I know how to work a small chest that won't fill. I got the kettle on for steam, and I got that boy over the vapor with a blanket tented around us both, and I told the woman to sit down before she fell down, and she wouldn't. She stood there in my doorway with the snow melting off her into a puddle on my floor, watching her son, and she would not sit until his breathing came easier. Which it did near midnight. That first ragged full breath he took, I've heard a lot of sounds in my life. That's near the top. Only then did she sit, and only then did I really look at her. She wasn't but 28, 29. Would have been handsome if the cold and the worry hadn't been at her so long. Her coat was good wool once, but the hem was gone to threads and one sleeve was torn and re-sewn with the wrong color thread. Careful little stitches somebody'd made trying to keep dignity in a thing that had none left. Her boots were a man's boots, too big, stuffed with rag at the toes. And her hands. I'll never forget her hands. 2 fingers on the left already going the gray-white of frostbite, and she hadn't said one word about them. She'd carried her boy up my mountain and let her own fingers freeze rather than loosen her grip on him. "You'll lose those if we don't work on them," I said. She looked down at her own hand like it belonged to somebody else. "Which two?" she said, flat, like she was already doing the arithmetic of what she could stand to lose. I got her hands in cool water first. You don't go straight to hot. That's how folks lose more than they have to, and I worked them slow. And she sat there with her jaw set and her eyes on the boy and never once made a sound, even when the feeling came back, and I know for a fact it burned like fire ants under the skin. That's when I started to understand what kind of person had come to my door. Not a helpless one. A person who'd learned, somewhere hard, that making noise doesn't help, and had stopped making it a long time ago. Her name came out in pieces over the next hour. Della. The boy was Samuel, called Sammy, 3 years old. Her husband Tom had been a decent hand on the rail spur down past Cottonwood, killed the previous spring when a load shifted. No insurance. No people of his own, which left Della and Sammy with her own blood, 3 brothers who ran the Whitmore holdings her father had left when he passed. Good land. 200 head. A house with 6 rooms and a piano nobody played. They wouldn't take you in, I asked. I couldn't help it, it didn't make sense to me. She was quiet a long while. The fire popped. Outside, the wind found the corner of the cabin and worked at it like it wanted in too. Carl said there wasn't room, she said finally. Carl's got the big house, 6 rooms. She said it without heat. That was the thing that got me, no heat in it at all, like she'd already worn the anger down to nothing carrying it. 532 acres and no room for me and Sammy. Ray said his wife wouldn't stand for it. And Joseph, she stopped. Something crossed her face and went away. Joseph gave me $2 and told me not to come back and shame the family name. Shame it how? Widow, she said, with a sick child and no money, in their church, where they've got a pew with our name carved in it. She looked at me then, straight on, and I saw she wasn't asking me to feel sorry for her. She was just telling me the shape of the thing so I'd know what I'd let in my door. A poor Whitmore's worse than a dead one to them. Dead you can put flowers on. Poor just keeps showing up. I didn't have anything to say to that. I'm not a man of many words on a good day, and this wasn't one. So I did what I do, which is I got up and got her soup, and I put more wood on, and I made a bed for the boy in my own bed and told her she'd take the cot, and I'd take the chair, and there'd be no arguing about it. And she looked at me, this stranger, this old man, this nothing to her, and her face did something complicated, something between gratitude and suspicion and a bone-deep exhaustion, and she said, "Why?" Not thank you, just why. Like kindness had gone so scarce in her life she'd stopped trusting it came free. "Because it's 22 below," I said, "and you're already here." She didn't believe that was the whole of it. She was right not to, but it was all I could give her that night, and it was enough to let her sleep. I should tell you about the mountain, because you can't understand what came after without it. My place sits at 9,000 feet, last cabin on a road that gives out a mile past me into nothing but game trail and timber. Below me, the valley, the Whitmore land, the town of Cottonwood, the church, all of it green and easy in summer, prosperous in the way of low country where the water comes to you instead of you going to it. Up here, water's an argument you have every single day. The growing season's a rumor. I run 40 head of cattle where a smarter man would run 20, and I do it because I'm too stubborn to go down and too poor to go anywhere else, and because Marta's buried on the south slope where she can see the whole valley, and I won't leave her up here alone. People think a hard place makes hard people. It's the opposite mostly. A hard place makes you soft toward anything else trying to survive in it because you know exactly what it's costing them. The Valley Whitmores had never once been cold or hungry or afraid, and it had made them mean. Della had been cold and hungry and afraid her whole widowed year, and it had scoured her down to something I'd call the opposite of mean. Not soft. God, no, but clean, clear. A person with no more lies to tell herself about who'd help her. She woke before me. I found her already up, my own kitchen half cleaned, Sammy's fever broken, and the boy sitting up eating cornmeal mush like he'd been at my table his whole life. She'd found my mending basket, and there was a shirt of mine there she'd already patched, that same careful, wrong-colored stitching. She caught me looking. "I don't take charity I can't pay back," she said. "I'll work while we're here, then we'll go." "Go where?" She didn't answer, because there was no answer and we both knew it, and she was too honest to make one up. Now here's where I have to be careful in the telling, because it'd be easy to make this the story of an old man who saved a woman, and that's not the story. That's not even close to the story. The truth is what I gave her was small. A roof for a week, warm water for her hands. She lost the tip of one finger despite everything and never once blamed me for it. What she did, what I watched her do over the weeks that turned into months that turned into a thing I never planned, that was the real story. And I was just the fool lucky enough to have a front row seat. Because she didn't leave in a week. The morning she meant to go, another storm came in, worse than the first. Whiteout on the pass. No sane person travels that, not with a child. So she stayed, and to earn the staying she worked, and I watched a woman who'd been told by her own brothers that she was a shame, and a burden turn out to be the most capable human being I'd had on that mountain since I buried the last one. She could split wood. Not pretend to split it, a full cord in 2 days with those ruined hands, and when I told her to stop and let the fingers heal, she looked at me like I'd suggested she quit breathing. She could doctor a cow. Turned out old Tom had worked cattle before the rail, and he'd taught her, and she had the touch, that thing you can't teach, where an animal trusts you before it knows why. My milk cow had been holding back her milk for a month out of pure spite, and Della had her let down in 3 days flat, just by being calm in a way I never learned to be. And she noticed things. That was the part that unsettled me, in a good way, the way it unsettles you when you meet someone smarter than you'd allowed yourself to expect. Third day, she stood at my window looking down the mountain and she said, "You're losing your east water." My what? Your spring line, the east one, it's icing wrong. You've got a leak somewhere, it's freezing and refreezing, and by March you'll have no pressure to the low field. She said it plain, like reading me the weather. I'd been up here 41 years. I hadn't seen it. She'd been here 3 days. She'd seen it from a window. We fixed it together the next clear day. Her and me and Sammy bundled up watching. And she was right. Of course she was right. There was a split in the pipe under a slab of shale where the water had been leaking and freezing all winter. And if we'd left it, I'd have lost my low field by spring and 40 head of cattle their late graze, and I'd have never known why until it was too late. That night I wrote in my frost book, after the temperatures and the ice. I wrote, "A woman came up the mountain with nothing and found the leak I'd been walking over for a year." I don't know why I wrote it. I don't usually put people in the frost book, but it felt like weather. It felt like something the mountain had decided to do to me, and I'd learned long ago you write down what the mountain does whether you understand it or not. The brothers came looking. Of course they did. Not out of worry. I want to be clear on that because I spent a while thinking there might have been a spark of decency in it, and there wasn't. It was February, 3 weeks in, first real thaw, and Carl Whitmore rode up my road in a coat worth more than my whole herd, with Ray behind him, and they didn't get down off their horses. Wouldn't dirty their boots on my mountain. Carl looked at the smoke from my chimney and the boys' little tracks in the melting snow, and he said, "So she is up here." We heard. "She's working," I said. Working. Carl let that word sit there like it amused him. He was a big soft man gone to fat in the way of men who eat well and lift nothing, and he had a face I wanted to reorganize. "You know what people are saying. A widow up a mountain living with an old bachelor. You've made her a—" He didn't say the word. He was too much of a coward even to say the word. "You've ruined what little name she had left." And I understood, standing there, the whole ugly machine of it. They didn't want her back. They just didn't want her out of their control, out of their story, living free on a mountain where their opinion couldn't reach her. A poor Whitmore who accepted their crumbs was shameful but manageable. A poor Whitmore who'd found her own feet without them was a threat. Because if she didn't need them, then their turning her away wasn't the hard, practical choice they'd told themselves it was. It was just cruelty. And cruelty's only comfortable when the person you did it to stays broken enough to prove they deserved it. I was about to say something I'd have enjoyed and regretted when the cabin door opened behind me. Della came out. She'd heard the whole thing. The walls aren't thick. And I watched her come down the steps into that thin February sun, and she was not the woman who'd fallen up my road in January. 3 weeks of full meals and hard work and being told by nobody that she was a burden had put something back in her spine. She stood at the bottom of my steps with her ruined hand and her 2 big boots, and she looked up at her brothers on their fine horses, and she wasn't cold, and she wasn't afraid, and she wasn't asking for anything. Not one thing. And I saw Carl register it, saw the exact second he understood he'd lost some leverage he hadn't even known he was holding. "Carl," she said, "Ray." "Della," Carl tried for stern. "This is a disgrace. You'll come down. Ray's wife has agreed to take the boy." "No," Della said. "Just that, no. You'll come down and be respectable or you'll—" "Carl," she didn't raise her voice. That was the thing. She never raised her voice this whole story, not once, and it made every word land like a stone in still water. "The night Sammy couldn't breathe, I stood on your porch, your 6-room porch. I could see your fire through the window, and you told me through the door you didn't even open it. You told me there wasn't room. Sammy was blue, Carl, and you talked to me through a door." Ray looked away. Ray at least had that much in him. Carl didn't. "And this man," she went on, and she didn't look at me. She kept her eyes right on her brothers. "This man I never met before in my life opened his door at midnight in 20 below and took the child out of my arms and knew what to do when I didn't. He lost sleep. He lost a week's food he couldn't spare. And when I asked him why, you know what he said? He said, 'Because you're already here.'" The mountain was very quiet. Even the wind had stopped to listen, it felt like. "You had every reason to help me, and you didn't," Della said. "He had every reason not to, and he did. So don't you ride up here and talk to me about the family name. You buried the family name in the snow on your own porch, and I'm the only one who was standing close enough to see you do it." Carl's face went the color of a bad sunset. He pulled his horse around hard. "You'll regret this," he said. "You've got nothing. You'll be back down that road on your knees before winter's out, and there won't be room then either." And Della, and this is the moment I'd write in the frost book that night, the moment I'll carry to the south slope where Marta's waiting. Della smiled. Just a little. Not mean. Almost sad. "I've been on my knees a whole year, Carl," she said. "I got up 3 weeks ago. I'm not going back down." They rode off. I stood there next to her, and neither of us said anything for a long minute, watching the two of them get small on the road. 2 rich men who'd come to reclaim their sister's shame and found she'd left it somewhere on the mountain and couldn't be bothered to go get it. "You didn't have to say all that on my account," I told her finally. "I didn't," she said. "I said it on mine." And she went back inside to Sammy. But she stopped in the doorway, didn't turn around, and she said, so quiet I almost missed it, "Thank you for the why. Nobody ever gave me a why before that wasn't about them." Then the door closed, and I stood on my own steps in the February thaw. An old man with a frost book and 40 head of cattle, and a hole in my life the exact shape and size of the family I'd buried. And I understood that something had come up my mountain in January that I wasn't going to be able to send back down. I didn't know yet what it would cost me. I didn't know yet what it would give me. That winter had 2 more turns to take, and one of them would break my heart in a way I hadn't been broken since Marta, and the other. Well, that's the part I've never told anyone. Everybody up here learns it eventually. March gives you 3 warm days and a false spring, melts the low snow, brings the geese back early, tricks the aspen buds into swelling, and then, right when you've let your guard down, right when you've told yourself the worst is behind you, it turns around and hands you the killing storm of the whole year. The one that catches the geese out and freezes them to the pond. The one that catches the calves. I knew all this. I'd written it in my frost book 41 times, and I still let March lie to me that year because I wanted it to be true so badly. We'd made it through, the 3 of us. Della had her strength back and half a finger gone and a laugh that had started coming out of her again by the end of February, a low, surprised laugh, like each time it caught her off guard that she still had won. Sammy called me Mr. Book because of the Frost Journal, and had taken to following me around the barn, narrating everything I did in the fierce, serious way of 3-year-olds. Mr. Book is feeding the cow. Mr. Book dropped the thing. Mr. Book said a bad word. I hadn't laughed like that in years. I hadn't laughed like that since before the South Slope had a stone on it. So when March gave us those 3 warm days, I let myself believe. I need to back up and tell you what we'd built, because otherwise the loss won't mean what it should. Over February, without ever quite deciding to, we'd become something. Not what the valley whispered. Della had her cot, and I had my chair, and there was never one moment of anything else, and if you thought otherwise, you'd have to not know either of us. What we'd become was harder to name and more true. We'd become a working outfit. A small, stubborn, 3-person operation surviving at 9,000 feet on grit and each other. She'd taken over the cattle books because my arithmetic was old and slow, and hers was quick. She'd found me $40 I didn't know I had, just from reading my accounts right. I'd been buying feed from a man in Cottonwood who'd been quietly cheating me on weight for 6 years, and she caught it in an afternoon. 6 years. She caught it in an afternoon. And I'd started teaching her the mountain, where the ice comes first, how to read the north face, which trails hold and which slide, the frost book stuff, the paying attention prayer. She took to it the way she took to everything, completely, seriously, like knowledge was a thing that could never be taken from you the way houses and money and brothers could. They can't repossess what's in your head, she said to me once, and I understood then that the whole shape of her ambition had been carved by loss. She wanted to know things, because knowing was the only wealth nobody had ever been able to shut a door on. We'd even started to plan. Careful, small plans. She'd stay through calving, earn a real wage, and by summer she'd have enough to lease the old Petrie place 2 ridges over, run a few head of her own, raise Sammy on land that answered to nobody but her. It wasn't much of a dream. It was the biggest dream she'd let herself have in years, and I'd catch her at the window sometimes looking east toward the Petrie place with a look on her face that I can only call hunger. Not for comfort. She'd given up on comfort, but for a door that only she held the key to. That was the dream. That's what March came to test. The storm came on the 4th day, and it came wrong. No proper build to it. The barometer in my head, 41 years of it, felt the drop too fast and too deep, and I got a bad feeling by noon and a worse one by 3. The sky over the pass went the color of a bruise. The temperature, which had been up near 40 that morning, started falling like something had cut the rope holding it. And we had a problem that couldn't wait, because that morning, trusting the fall spring, I'd let the cattle up onto the high east graze where the snow had melted off. 40 head, up high, with a killing storm coming down the pass straight at them. "We have to bring them down," I said. Della was already pulling on Tom's old coat. "Sammy stays here. Banked fire door barred, and he doesn't open it for anybody but us." She was already at his level, hands on his shoulders, telling him in that calm, flat voice that this was a big boy job, watching the fire, and she'd be back before dark, and he was in charge of Mr. Book's book and had to write down the weather. Gave him a pencil, 3 years old. Gave him a job so he wouldn't be scared. I've thought about that 1,000 times since. How, in the middle of her own fear, she found the exact thing to do to make his smaller. Then we rode up into it. I'm not going to pretty up what that ride was, because there wasn't anything pretty in it. The wind came over the pass at a speed that took the breath out of your mouth before you could use it. The snow wasn't falling so much as flying sideways, and it wasn't soft. It was ice, small and hard, and it drew blood on any skin you left out. We got up to the high graze, and the cattle were already in trouble, bunched and drifting the wrong way. The way panicked cattle do, drifting with the wind instead of against it, which up there meant drifting toward the drop-offs on the north edge, where the ground gives out into a gully 40 feet deep. You bring cattle down a mountain in a storm by getting below them and pushing, by being louder and more insistent than their fear, by using the 2 dogs in your own body and your voice until you're hoarse and then past hoarse. And it was working. Slow, ugly, terrifying, but working. We had the main bunch turned and moving down the good trail, 30-some head, and I let myself think we'd do it. We'd get them all, we'd beat the storm. Then Della saw the calves. 6 of them. Late-drop calves, the little ones, and they'd gotten separated from the main bunch in the chaos and drifted off onto a shelf of ground below the north edge. A shelf that in summer is nothing, a easy step, but that in that storm with the ice building was a slick shale ramp above a 40-foot drop. The mothers were bawling on the good trail, torn between the herd's pull and the calves' cries, and the calves were bawling back and they were going to go over. You could see it coming. In another few minutes the ice or the panic would take them over the edge and their mothers might follow. And we'd lose the calves and maybe the cows and maybe, if you were fool enough to go after them, a person. Leave them, I shouted. I want you to know I said that. I said leave them. 6 calves against a human life is not a hard sum for a man who's buried people. Della, leave them, they're gone, we saved the main bunch. She was already off her horse. I've turned this over so many times. Whether I could have stopped her. Whether if I'd been 10 years younger or faster, or if the wind hadn't taken my words. But the truth is there was no stopping her. Because I finally understood, in that instant, watching her go down onto that killing shelf of ice after 6 calves that weren't even hers, exactly who Della Whitmore was. She was a person who knew in her body, knew in the marrow of her scoured-down soul, what it is to be small and cold and drifting toward the edge while the ones who could save you decide you're not worth the risk. She'd been the calf on the shelf. She'd stood on Carl's porch and been left. And she had made herself a promise somewhere in that lonely widowed year, a promise I don't think she ever said out loud, that she would never in her life be the one who stood safe on the good trail and let something small go over the edge. So she went, down onto the ice into the wind after them. And she got them. That's the thing I need you to hear before I tell you the rest. She got them. All 6. One at a time, some of them, carrying, dragging, driving the bigger ones ahead of her with her body between them and the drop, her ruined hands with the missing fingertip finding grip on ice that had no grip in it, working up that shale ramp by pure will while I got below with the dogs and took each one as she got it to me. It took maybe 20 minutes. It was the bravest and stupidest and most purely her thing I have ever watched a human being do. 6 calves. She saved everyone. She was reaching for the last one, the smallest, when the shale went. I saw it. I'll always see it. Not a dramatic thing, the mountain doesn't do drama, it just does physics. A slab of ice-slicked shale the size of a wagon bed simply let go under her weight and Tom's 2 big boots that never fit her right, and her feet went out, and she went down hard on the ramp and started to slide. And she had the little calf in her arms and she would not let it go, even then, even sliding toward a 40-foot drop. She would not open her arms and she threw it. That's what she did. In the half-second she threw the calf upslope toward me and the good ground, saved it, and by doing it gave up the reach she might have used to catch herself. I got her wrist. I want that in here too. I'm 69 years old with a bad hip and I threw myself flat on that ice and I got her wrist as she went past, both my old hands around her one, and for one moment I had her. For one moment I thought I'd hold. But ice is ice and I'm old, and she was sliding with the whole weight of the mountain's pull, and my grip on her wrist slid down to her hand, and her hand, her ruined, frostbit, missing-fingered hand, her hand slid through mine. She went over the north edge in the snow at the last light of a March afternoon, and the storm closed over the place where she'd been like water closing over a stone. I'm going to stop the telling here for a moment, because I have to, because even now, writing it, my hand won't go steady. They found her at the bottom of the gully the next morning when the storm broke, in a drift so deep it had almost buried her. The fall hadn't killed her outright, the doctor from Cottonwood, who rode up out of some decency his patients rarely got to see, said she'd have gone in the night from the cold, quick, that she wouldn't have suffered long. I don't know if that's true. I think doctors say that. But I choose to believe it, the way I chose to believe March, because some lies are the only warm thing you're given and you take them. Every calf lived. All 6. All 40 head of cattle came down off that mountain, and I've never been able to look at those 6 calves grown to cows without my throat closing, because I know exactly what they cost. And Sammy, God, Sammy, 3 years old, sitting by a banked fire with a pencil and his big boy job, waiting for a mother who told him she'd be back before dark and who kept every promise she ever made except that one. I couldn't tell him that night. I couldn't make the words. He fell asleep waiting, the pencil still in his hand, and I sat in my chair and watched him, and I understood that the mountain had done to me the thing I'd sworn after Marta I'd never let it do again. It had made me love something, and then it had shown me the cost. The brothers came for the funeral. Of course they did. Carl and Ray and Joseph in their good coats at the little church with the pew that had their name carved in it, and the whole valley there to see, and they stood up front like grieving family, and Carl even said some words about his beloved sister taken too soon. And I sat in the back with Sammy on my knee, and I did not trust myself to stand up, because if I'd stood up I'd have said the thing that was in me, which was, you put her on that mountain. Every one of you. You shut the doors that sent her up my road, and she died saving 6 calves that weren't hers because she'd learned from you exactly what it looks like when someone decides you're not worth the risk. And she swore she'd never be you, and it killed her. And you have got no right on God's earth, to say her name in this warm church you never let her into. I didn't say it. I held the boy and I let it burn. But that's not the part I've never told. The part I've never told is what Carl did after the funeral. What he came up my mountain to do, 3 days later, with a paper in his hand and Joseph beside him, and a look on his face I'd seen before, the leveraged look, the look of a man who's found something he thinks he can hold over you. Because it turned out Della Whitmore, in the 3 weeks between the day her brothers found her on my mountain and the day the ice took her, had done something. Something with the $40 she'd saved, and the arithmetic that was quicker than mine, and the fierce, clear knowing of a woman who trusted only what couldn't be repossessed. And what she'd done changed everything about what came next. For Sammy, for me, for the Petrie place 2 ridges over, and for the 3 brothers who thought they'd come up my mountain to close one last door. Carl came up the mountain the way rich men do when they think they've already won, slow, unhurried, letting you watch him come. It was 3 days after we put Della in the ground. Snow still on the north face, but the road was clear, and I heard the horses, and I knew before I saw them, the way you know weather. I stood on my steps with Sammy inside, and the door opened behind me so I could hear the boy, and I waited. Carl had a paper in his hand. Joseph was behind him. Ray wasn't. I noticed that. I'd notice later what it meant. "Morning," Carl said, like we were neighbors. I didn't answer. There's a kind of quiet that's more honest than any word, and I'd learned it from Della, who'd only ever raised her voice at me once, the day the storm ate her words on the high grays, and never any other time. "I'll come to it plain," Carl said, getting down off his horse at last, dirtying his good boots on my ground for the first time ever, which told me how bad he wanted whatever this was. "The boy, Samuel, he's a Whitmore. He belongs with his family, not up a mountain with a stranger. Ray's wife has softened on it. She'll take him. We've had papers drawn." He held them out. "It's the decent thing. It's what Della would have wanted." And that "it's what Della would have wanted," that was the thing that near broke my hold on myself. Because they'd never once, not one time in the woman's whole life, wondered what Della wanted, and now that she was dead and couldn't contradict them, they'd made themselves the keepers of her wishes. Dead you can put flowers on. Dead you can speak for. I looked at the paper. I didn't take it. "You want the boy," I said. "He's family." "He wasn't family in January." I kept my voice low, Della's low. "He was blue at the mouth on your porch in January, and you talked to his mother through a door. He wasn't family in February when you rode up here to shame her back down. What changed, Carl?" Carl's jaw worked. And here's where I understood the whole of it, the way Della would have understood it in an afternoon, and it took me 3 days and a funeral to see. Because behind Carl, Joseph shifted in his saddle and wouldn't look at me, and there was a hunger in the two of them that had nothing to do with a 3-year-old boy. "The Petrie place," I said slowly. "This is about the Petrie place." Carl's face gave it away. He was never any good at hiding a thing. His sister had gotten all the steel in that family and left him the softness. "So let me tell you now what Della did in her 3 weeks. The thing I've never told a living soul. The reason I've carried this story 40 years without saying it out loud, because saying it meant living the whole afternoon on the ice again, and I've only just now gotten old enough that I'd rather it live in someone else's memory than die with me. Those $40 she found in my books, the cheat she caught in the feed weights. She was quick with money the way some people are quick with music. It just made sense to her, patterns other people couldn't see. And in her 3 weeks on my mountain, working the cattle books at night after Sammy slept, she'd found something else. Not in my books, in the county's. The old Petrie place, the Two-Ridge-Over dream. The door only she'd hold the key to, it had gone to back taxes years before. Everybody in the valley knew it was Petrie land and always would be. The way everybody knew the Whitmores were rich, because that's how valleys work. The story of who owns what gets told so long it stops being checked. But Della, who trusted nothing that couldn't be proven, had ridden down to the county seat one clear February day. I'd thought she was buying thread, and she'd checked. And the Petrie place wasn't Petrie land anymore. It had reverted to the county for unpaid tax, and it was sitting there, unclaimed, available to anyone who'd pay the arrears. Which was $11. $11. 160 acres, spring-fed, 2 ridges over, with a sound barn and a house that needed work but stood. $11 in back tax that nobody had paid because nobody had bothered to look. Because everybody already knew it was Petrie land, and knowing is cheaper than checking. Della paid it. Out of her $40 saved from wages I paid her for splitting my wood and fixing my spring line and catching a 6-year cheat in an afternoon. She paid the $11 and she filed the papers in her own name, Della Whitmore, and then, and this is the part, this is the whole part she didn't tell me. She didn't tell me because she was going to. She had it planned. She was going to work through calving, earn the rest, fix the house. And then walk me over 2 ridges some clear morning and show me the door she'd made with her own key and watch my face. She was saving it. The way you save the best thing to give someone, so you can be there when they open it. I found the deed after, in my mending basket, wrapped in the shirt she'd patched with the wrong colored thread. 160 acres in her name. And underneath it, in her careful hand, a second paper she'd had drawn the same day at the county seat, witnessed and sealed, that I didn't understand until Carl came up my mountain with his own papers 3 days after the funeral. Because Della Whitmore, who trusted only what couldn't be repossessed, who'd learned every lesson her brothers ever taught her about how the world takes things from the small and the poor, Della had made a will. A widow with a missing fingertip and a dead husband and $40 had, in her 3 weeks of not quite safety on my mountain, quietly made herself a landowner and then made a will because she knew. She knew that if anything happened to her, there was exactly one thing her brothers would come for, and it wasn't the boy. It was the land, the moment it was worth having, the moment there was a door with a key. And she'd known they'd use the boy to get it. Use Sammy as the lever. Take him for family, and control the Petrie land he'd inherit until he was grown and they could keep it. She'd seen the whole thing coming, from a window, like the spring line leak. And she'd stopped it. The will left the Petrie place, and everything she owned, and the words are burned in me, the raising and keeping of my son Samuel to me. To Mr. Book, the old man with the Frost Journal. She'd named me guardian, witnessed and sealed at the county 3 weeks before the ice, and she'd wrapped it in a patched shirt and left it where she knew I'd find it, and she'd never said a word because she was saving it, because she thought she'd have time. She was wrong about the time. She was right about everything else. So when Carl held out his papers on my steps, I went inside, slow, my bad hip, made him wait, and I came back out with Della's. and I put them in his soft hands and I watched him read. I watched Carl Whitmore read his dead sister's will, the will of the woman he'd talked to through a door, and understand that from the far side of the grave she had reached out one ruined hand and shut a door on him. Firmly, legally, forever. That she'd seen him coming 3 weeks before she died and had beaten him to it with $11 and an afternoon's ride he'd never have bothered to make himself. He read it twice. His face did something I'd waited a long time to see it do. And then he said the only thing a man like that can say, quiet, more to himself than me. She was always the smart one. He'd never said it while she lived. It cost him nothing now. Joseph turned his horse without a word. Carl stood a moment longer, and I'll give him this one thing, the only thing I'll give him. He looked past me through the open door to where Sammy sat on the floor with the frost book and a pencil, drawing weather that only he could see. And something moved in Carl's soft face that might in a better man have grown into shame. Might have. I watched for it. It didn't take root. Rich men's shame is like the fall spring. It comes warm and it looks like the real thing, and then March turns it around. He's yours then, Carl said. Not kind, just done. He's his own, I said. I'm just keeping him till he knows it. They rode down my mountain, the two of them, and I never saw Carl Whitmore again in his life or mine. Ray, though, Ray who hadn't come, Ray who'd looked away on the high steps in February. Ray came up alone that summer with a milk cow tied behind his horse and left it in my corral without much of a speech, just for the boy, and rode off before I could decide whether to thank him or curse him. I never worked it out. People aren't sums. Della could have told you that. She'd have read Ray in an afternoon and known the exact weight of what was in him, the way she read my books and the counties and the leak under the shale. I couldn't. I'm slower than she was. I've had 40 years to think about Ray and that cow, and I still don't know if it was guilt or grief, or just the one clean thing a weak man could find to do, and I've decided it doesn't matter, because the milk was real and the boy drank it and grew. He grew. That's the thing about children, they don't stop for your grief, and thank God they don't, because if Sammy had stopped I might have too. He kept me alive that first year the way a job keeps you alive when nothing else will. There was a boy who needed feeding and teaching and a mother-shaped hole in him that I couldn't fill and didn't try to, only stood near, the way you stand near a young tree in a wind. Not to hold it. You can't hold it, only to be the thing it grows up beside. I taught him the mountain, where the ice comes first, how to read the north face, the whole paying attention prayer. I gave him the frost book when he was 12 and he's kept it since, in his own hand now, the temperatures and the ice and the first melt-off bald knob, 40 more years of it stacked on my 41. He worked the Petri place from the time he could sit a horse, and he fixed the house his mother bought for $11, and he runs cattle there now, good land, spring-fed, a door that answers to nobody but him. Sammy Whitmore, of the Petri place, poorest born and hardest-earned landowner in a valley full of men who inherited theirs. He named his own daughter Della, course he did. And me, I'm old now in the way that's past useful, the way where you keep a frost book mostly so your hand remembers how. Sammy checks on me, brings the girl. Little Della sits on my floor and draws whether only she can see, and I watch her. And some evenings the light comes across the valley just so, off the low fields her grandmother saved from a springline leak. Up the mountain her grandmother died on saving 6 calves that weren't hers, and I have to go sit on the south slope a while, next to Marta, next to the second stone I put there, because I brought her up in the end. I brought Della up off the valley floor and buried her on my mountain, where the whole country she never got to own spreads out below her, and where nobody has to talk to her through a door ever again. I go up there and I tell her things. What Sammy's doing, what the girl said, how the calving went. I tell her she was right about all of it, right about the land and the will and her brothers and the exact shape of what was coming, right the way weather is right, whether you believe it or not. I've only never told her one thing. I've never told her I'm sorry my grip slid, that I had her wrist and then her hand and then just the cold, and that I've spent 40 years wondering if 10 years younger, if a better hip, if I'd thrown myself a half-second sooner. I've never told her that up there on the slope because I know exactly what she'd say. She'd say it flat, in that low voice she never raised but once. She'd say, "You had every reason to let me go, and you didn't. Nobody ever gave me a why that wasn't about them. You gave me the boy's whole life. Don't you dare apologize for the one thing your hands couldn't do." I know she'd say it, I can hear it plain. I just can't ever seem to say the sorry first, so she can. So it sits there between us, up on the south slope, the one door I never could get open.